We started off this morning, or at least our second lecture, with a talk about to boldly preserve. And that was half a decade ago. And I want to emphasize, our major goals then were emphasizing the collection, the preservation, and need to provide access to the history of the space program in the or space exploration and exploitation in all of its various ways. As Jeff Nunn talked so well or described so well this morning, we had almost 100 people met at the American Institute of Physics in College Station, and we had very different groups coming together. Indeed, we had archivists, we had historians, we had record managers, many of whom were meeting each other for the first time. In the half decade since then, we've run into a few issues. One of them was COVID. The other was a pretty, I'm not going to say incompetent, but a pretty incompetent administrator. That was me. I think I'm the living proof that just because beware academics who think they can manage. I shouldn't do that. But also, we realized that most of the people involved liked the idea, liked the concept, and they all had day jobs. That doing this was on top of what they were doing. We also learned there's a much greater need for better information sharing among groups, within groups, between people. And underlying this was our biggest challenge of lack of resources, and resources broadly defined. One, and as we'll see, this is particularly true in private organizations or groups that didn't have a mandate or requirement to preserve some of their history, finding someone to say, this is important, this is a priority. If people just said, oh gosh, you're right, we do want to preserve our history, how do we do that? What sort of guidance can we give them? And our website, toboldlypreserve.space, is one way of doing that. There's a lot of other information that we could easily provide to people and institutions. But actually implementing this demanded either paid staff, volunteers, needs people to get things done. Questions of, okay, we've preserved our history, maybe we've done oral histories, what do you do with it then? How do you process it? Where are you going to store it and access it? As we'll see, this is a challenge that Leonard David has now. And at the end of the day, a lot of it does come down to money or the use of volunteers. How are you going to pay for? How are you going to pay for this? How can you make this a priority? And one consistent problem within NASA has been a sense of, well, yeah, this is sort of important, but we need all of the money to actually do missions. We need to think for the future, not worry about yesterday's technology. As Jeff Nunn also talked about this morning, dealing with the corporate world and also the world of nonprofits or private organizations has its own challenges. A big one is trying to spark that interest, and how do you raise that interest in, oh yeah, what we're doing should be collected and preserved. And there are good corporate reasons or good corporate fears why not to do that. Are you going to give away some of your secret sauce that makes you competitive, or you think makes you competitive? Or what's the role of lawyers? And I think you could view lawyers and archives to the way astronauts viewed doctors. They can only harm you, they can't help you. And indeed, one large corporation had an archivist, and he said, yeah, we basically practice archiving by lawyers, which is if you absolutely don't need it, throw it away. So if there's a lawsuit later It's, oh, well, we didn't keep that, not because it was a really embarrassing paper, but we do that with all of our papers. We learned today about at least one, if not more, companies that took their equipment out of I think a blockhouse in Cape Canaveral because we don't want to share. We'd rather trash it than have it preserved. And again, that issue of resources, especially if you've got a startup that's scrambling to meet its payroll or to reduce its burn rate, how do you justify that expense? Especially to venture capitalists who are looking forward to retiring on your what you were doing, not reading about the history of it. One of the ways, how do you appeal to people, to organizations' best interest, and you can talk about principle. Pragmatism seems to work better. That this is going to be better for your company. It will, or if you're the government, we can improve. This will increase interest in STEM education if we talk about our glorious engineering past, our accomplishments. So appealing to pragmatism as much as principle is, I think, one way of dealing with that. Who should be doing this? First, it's everybody in this room. And by the way, just listening to what a number of the people have done here, I think you would all be great topics of oral histories, of what you've done, how you've done it, and things that didn't work out. I should also say that one of my continuing areas of research is failure, which is actually the norm, and I'm of the belief that a lot can be learned from failure or things that didn't work out, as well as things that did work out. But archivists, recordsmen, you can read, and I differentiate historians from oral historians, because one of the differences of a historian with an oral historian is that the oral historians realize they have an imperative to go out and create new historical resources, as opposed to a lot of historians will just use what already has been collected. And Eric Rao of the Hagley has put together a very convincing argument of, if you're, you as a historian really should be thinking about helping, create more history resources for the future. And something that became very clear listening to some of these talks this morning for me was that the sites, the memorabilia, whether you're talking about a technical document or a space pin, or I don't have it here, but a really nice 2020 patch to preserve space. And that, by the way, the patch was a brilliant idea and helps reinforce the fact that we are definitely part of the space effort. And I look forward to the patch that's going to come from the 2024 conference. But that oral histories can attach to those launch sites, attach to those training centers, attach to those patches, can add meaning, can humanize them, but at the same time they can also stir the memories of the participants, so that it's a dual use function. And something to think about for this group is, how could you use oral histories or preserving, collecting records of these artifacts in a way that combines the best of them and adds value to both. Just a couple off the top observations, one of which is that there's not a single solution, or as my one reason historians make very poor politicians is that politicians tend to speak in basic black and white terms. Here's my answer that'll solve it. Historians look at a complicated question or problem and say, it's complicated, which A, tends to be more accurate, and B, nobody really wants to hear. But there are lots of options. There's a wide range of, and a growing group range of volunteer groups of people that can create oral histories, can help you record, collect, preserve, but they have to be found, they have to be convinced, and they have to be coordinated with. And just like universities courting potential donors, this is usually a long-term effort. Did want to talk about a couple of positive activities going on. There are some a lot of neat archival work going on now. Greg mentioned the Museum of Flight is reevaluating its digital efforts. The University of Alabama in Huntsville has now set up a digital history initiative, working not just with the UAH faculty, staff, and students, but reaching out to Marshall, reaching out to Redstone. So we expect some exciting work there. And Molly Stothert-Mahler and Lisa Duncan at University of Arizona just came out with a really neat article about the challenges of actually processing a space collection. What is it like? And finding out that ITAR regulations are a real concern. What's also important, though, is getting early buy-in from the donor about preparing the collection for donation, including, and this is going to sound minor, but it's really important, are you making a list of the acronyms and abbreviations that are being used? Because what might be clear to you, 30 years later, you've got a bunch of people saying, playing word games, which can be a lot of fun, but you could save a lot of problems. So we've got some really neat work going on there. Some of you may know about Quest magazine. If not, you should. It is a privately put out journal of space history. It might be a very good venue for some of the work that you all are doing. The Scott Sacknoff, one of the creators of Quest, has formed a group called Space 3.0, which has funded the creation of a finding aid for archives, special collections of, I think at last count, it's about 450 space collections, mostly in museums and archives. But this is something that did not exist before. It's still not ideal because it's, you can access it, but you have to go through Space 3.0 in order to contribute to it, which is actually a good form of quality control. One really interesting area of great potential is what do space journalists do when they retire? And Leonard David, who some of you may know, who has written about space activities for literally half a century, is now starting to go through his 2 storage cabins of stuff and swag to figure out what he has, what he wants to do with it. He's just in the beginning stages, and he may be actually a future model of what can you do with a journalist's archives. What should you do? And this is one area where To Boldly Preserve hopes to talk to other space writers and to possible archives to see, could we create a match between the journalist and the institution. Want to conclude with a couple of possible ways, both near-term and short-term groups to talk with. Jeff mentioned regional groups. Something we're also thinking about is contacting industry associations And one of the attractions there, if we can get their buy-in, in theory, that might give younger, smaller companies, or even bigger companies, a sense of A, this is legitimate, but B, corporate secrets won't be shared, if we can get people involved that way. When I talk about consultants, there are a couple of firms that have made a living the last several years writing about the future of space commercialization. Here's what we expect. Can we get hold of their archives? Can we interview them? Because that would give us a sense of, here's what the future of space looked like for the last few decades and next future. Can we target retirees, whether industry or private sector? They'll have time. They may have, as one of the talks mentioned, build documentation and lots of other stuff. And in some cases, a spouse that might be really excited at getting some of that out of the house. Other groups we should be thinking about are think tanks and NGOs, who also play a role in space policy, in creating the discussion. Are they doing anything to save their information? As well as what's being taught. What are students being taught today? How has that changed over time? And are the engineers of the future, is anybody keeping that history? Which goes to the fundraising. Some technical societies have historical committees or groups. I'm a member of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics History Committee. We now have an active chair, and one of our questions is, how can we reach out to local chapters to get them involved in preserving their history, as well as the larger institutional history. You also have, I'm not going to say elephants in the room, but there are also these other actors that we haven't really been talking about. The military, the national security establishments, non-NASA, well, I take that back because we have the National Park Service here today, but Department of State, FAA, Commerce, there are a lot of groups that have a finger in a growing pie. International organizations, whether governmental, non-governmental, state entities. We're in the state of Florida, which has a couple of state-promoted entities, and the rest of the world. I think we're now at 80-some nations have a satellite of some kind. The UAE has announced its intention to aim for the asteroid belt, building on its Mars exploration. Now might be a good. UAE may need a consultant for preserving its history. So if somebody's looking for a gig, and when you find out, ask them if they need a historian too. And there's actually one slide here that I seem to have lost. There's a group called the IEEE has put out, has created a wiki called the Engineering and Technology History Wiki.org. If you are looking for a place to display some of your projects, some of your history, I highly recommend this. And I'll make sure that you have a list of the name of the person to contact. But they have oral histories. They have plaques like IEEE milestones. They have interviews, all sorts of engineering history, timelines. So it's definitely something to think about for reaching out to a wider audience. And on that note, I'm going to stop, ask for questions, but to think. We came up with the name To Boldly Preserve partly as a play on Star Trek, but also because we realize that space history is being made, and I think we owe it to the future. As long as we're giving them global climate change, the least we should be doing is giving them a history of moving off planet. Thank you.